Hello, everyone. I'm Jean-Claude at Beyond Mystic, and welcome to this very special report. This is the third in the series here of the Angels and the Great Deception Exposed. With me to go even deeper into these fascinating conversation is Mr. Paul Wallis. You can find him at paulanthonywallis.com. You can find him on YouTube also here at Paul Wallis, as well as The Fifth Kind, where you can link also to the channel here, fifthkind.tv. Mr. Wallis, welcome back to the show, or welcome to the show, should I say, and Happy New Year. How are you today, sir?
Happy New Year. G'day from Australia. And I should say, salut Jean-Claude. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Salut, thank you so much for being here. Merci beaucoup d'être ici. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here this evening on this live interactive show. We are currently triple casting on Twitter, Rumble, as you can see on the screen here, as well as on YouTube. We're going to start this conversation, triple casting, and maybe within 10 or 15 minutes, guys, we are going to switch over here to the Rumble feed here for the no holds barred conversation. So if you're on the YouTube channel now, I'm going to bring the link to the Rumble feed down to you guys here in the live chat so that you can move over to the Rumble feed there when it's appropriate to do so. So there you go. First of all, Paul, Mr. Wallis, thank you so much for being on here. I'm very excited to have you on. Of course, this is 3 in a series of 5 here that we're producing on Beyond Mystic. I'm excited about your book, and I want to share this with the audience members. This is the Eden Conspiracies. This is my entry into your work, and I know you have previous books on that as well, but I found you through the work of Mauro Biglino and his book here, The Naked Bible, and also The Gods of the Bible. Let me just bring this up for the audience members as well. If you guys are looking at getting into this research also, please, you can find the Eden Conspiracies here on Amazon and other sources here on the web. So as we get into the introduction, I guess I want to set the stage for the audience members here in terms of what your background is. I have a little bit of a clip that I can play from the Fifth Kind TV that kind of shares that with the audience members. And then I also want you to kind of fill in from that audio clip here as to how universe conspired to bring you to the work you're doing today, which I absolutely find fascinating. So let me set up here. I'm just going to change the slide deck here and go to the second one, this one here. And we'll play this quick little introduction, and then we'll be right back here for your continuation here on your expertise.
Been a preacher for more than 30 years. I've studied and taught through the book of Genesis many times in churches all around the world, and I've trained pastors in the skills of interpreting text. You translate Elohim in the plural, it all makes sense, but what we actually have is a conflict among the sky people, among the powerful ones, over how intelligent the human species is to be. We've read stories of brutal colonization and ill treatment of human beings as the story of God and God's behavior. We've come up with a picture of God that is completely distorted. The Apostle Paul described God as the source of the cosmos and everything in it, that in which we all live and move and have our being. You go to the mistranslation of the Elohim stories and you've got a God who's brutal, violent, can genocide people or slaughter people who actually try to serve him. It's a monstrous deity we've created by mistranslation. And you can draw a straight line from that to all kinds of violence and abuses that we've justified in the name of God. And that comes down to mistranslation. When I talk about Bible translation, people might say, well, that's a bit of a rarefied topic, isn't it? But the implications of getting it wrong are enormous, and they have been through the ages.
Okay, there's a lot in there, and thank you for bearing with me through that. But Mr. Wallis, let's add to that here too. You've had tremendous life experience in this field of work, and I want you to set the stage for the audience members here to understand why perhaps today this information, these new translations, these new discoveries are so important for all of us as humans, as a collective, to understand. So share with the audience members here your background into this work and how universe conspired to have you doing the work that you're doing today, Mr. Wallis.
For sure. Well, people know me as the paleo contact guy. And paleo contact is the theory that our ancestors had contact with other civilizations in the deep past, meaning extraterrestrial visitors. My route into that is what surprises a lot of people, because my background is in the world of church ministry. And for 33 years, I worked in church-based ministry as a theological educator, a church doctor, an archdeacon for the Anglican Church in Australia, That's one down from a bishop. The Anglican Church is the Church of England, or the Episcopal Church as it's known in Canada, Episcopalian Church. And it was really my role in theological education that led me into the world of paleocontact, because I would teach my pastors hermeneutics and the history of Christian thought. Now, both those are really relevant to paleocontact, because Christian thought today is not the same as it was in the beginning. And the earliest views of the cosmos within Christianity were quite different to what they are today. So it's a background that begins to open up your thinking and expose some assumptions. But hermeneutics was the real white rabbit, because I would teach pastors hermeneutics, which is the principles of interpreting ancient texts. And so we would look at source criticism or source analysis, where you ask, where did this text come from? And is this the original? If it differs to the original, how does it differ and why does it differ? And then form criticism or form analysis. What kind of literature is this? And is this what it was in the beginning? And then the fundamental question you always have to ask, what do the words mean?
Right.
And I found that when I applied those basic disciplines to anomalies in the texts, or I should say anomalies in the stories that we tell from the texts, I realized there was a hidden layer of story that as preachers we don't often get to. And the anomalies are obvious to a child reading the Bible. If they start in the book of Genesis, quickly they'll be asking, why does God say, let us make? Who's this us? Let us make the humans to look like one of us. What does it mean, look like? What does it mean, one of us? Why is a God of love suddenly genociding this human race that he's created? Why is a civilization in Genesis 11 being bombed back into the Stone Age because it's breached zoning laws? There are lots of things that don't seem to make sense. Why in Genesis 3 is it the God character who wants to keep humans so unintelligent they don't even know they're naked, wants to keep them at an animal level of intelligence? Now, children pick up on these questions, adults do, preachers do. But one of the problems is that preachers are every bit as overscheduled as anybody else. And so through years of preaching and training pastors, I come across these anomalies and think, oh, I need to get back to that, work out what's going on there. And finally, I had the opportunity of a gap between pastorates where I could go back to some of these questions, drill down into them and work what was going on. So having time on my hands was one of the ways that the universe conspired to get me into this field. And in my first book of Paleocontact, Escaping from Eden, I give credit to an ultimate Frisbee injury, where I'm convalescing in my shipping crate cabin and just going to the texts, asking these fundamental questions. But when I did that, I had actually been primed to start looking for ET evidence in the text. And that was because of two things. Firstly, when I was 11 years old, my mum and dad introduced me to the work of Eric von Daniken. And it was actually that led me into the world of faith, because it was Eric von Daniken who put some very important questions to me, highlighted our inability to explain ourselves as a species, because we're somewhat ill-adapted to the planet. How come then we are the alpha species? I will make some assumptions and say that if you, Jean-Claude, or I were left in the wilderness on our own after 3 days, 3 nights, would probably be very ill, suffering from exposure, or deceased, or we've been eaten by something. The only way we're going to survive is if we can build a fire, build a structure, construct a weapon. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, where does the higher intelligence come from that enables us to do that? And as a boy, I found that science could not answer that. That was a gap in the story. Right. Religion couldn't answer it either. The religious answer is we're God's special creation. Well, if that's the case, how come it's so obvious that we're some kind of animal? The answer science offers is yes, we're some kind of animal, but then explaining the higher consciousness is a gap in the story. So these were questions in the back of my mind from the age of 11. And I noted Eric von Daniken's suggestion that we would better explain our development as a species if we allow for the possibility of external interventions in the development of Homo sapiens. He wasn't the first person to suggest this. Plato suggested it 2,500 years ago. But it was only when I suffered my ultimate Frisbee injury that I got back to those questions. And the big thing that prompted me, that told me, Paul, you need to get your skates on this topic, was the Roman Catholic Church in 2009, under the most conservative pope in my lifetime, convening a colloquium to discuss the theological implications of contact with other civilizations. And it was quite clear that in 2009, the Vatican was expecting a disclosure to be made about contact and wanted to get in ahead of time. And so had this symposium, top theologians and scholars from around the world discussing this topic with lots of fanfare, and then very senior spokespeople for the Curia stepping forward. So we had Jose Gabriel Funes, the director of the Vatican Observatory, the senior astronomer, Reverend Dr. Guy Consolmagno, Monsignor Corrado Balducci, the Vatican senior advisor in paranormal ministry, all saying we should expect contact with other civilizations. We should be ready to embrace them as a brother or sister alien. There's no theological issue here. They were saying it just means the Creator's been busier than we thought, and we shouldn't be surprised to find them because ETs are in the Bible, in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And when they said that, that was a real spur to everyone around the world, not just Roman Catholics, not just theologians, but to everyone with an interest in the universe we live in, to go back to the Bible and ask the question, are there ETs in here? And I went back and I did that study because I felt that the rest of the church was still asleep on this topic. There was still a great taboo around it. And I felt that just as Eric von Daniken broke that taboo back in the 1960s, it needs to be done again for a new generation. So I went, used my disciplines from theology, applied them to the ancient texts, and was blown away by what I found.
Thank you for that. And we're going to get into what you found this evening. We're going to take bite-sized pieces for the audience members. We're going to try to follow along with you in all of these amazing discoveries. Michelle in the chat says, I can't wait for this interview. Paul Wallis is fascinating to listen to. I agree. And that's why I have him on the show. Paul, just to go back a little bit, you talked about 11, and we have to collectively say thank you to that Frisbee that brought you onto this track here. But I want to go maybe a little bit younger. Were you, as a young child, also looking at the stars? Many of our viewers here at that age felt out of place, either that this wasn't their home or that they were longing for another home. And they were looking up at the stars thinking, maybe we're not alone. And maybe some of them also had what they thought to be paranormal experiences at that time. Was that also in your field of view as a young lad?
Not as a young lad. I think, again, at the age of 11, it wasn't that I was peering out at the stars and wondering if we were alone. At that age, I was asking a different question. And that was that I'd been brought up to understand the world and the universe in a particular kind of way. And I wanted to know if that was true, how close the reality was to my worldview. So I was a bit of a boffin. So that was the question in my mind at 11. But it was when I was 20 that I had some paranormal experiences, which at the time I had a real struggle interpreting what they were. And I never really talked about them because they seemed to be stories with a beginning, but no middle and an end. I didn't have the language to describe what had happened. And truly, it is only since I started my work in paleocontact, since I published Escaping from Eden, that I've gone back to those experiences when I was 20 and realized I was experiencing close encounters.
Aha. Okay. Before we go any further here in the conversation, we are going to talk about certain terms that have been perhaps mistranslated, why we think they're mistranslated, and what arguments we can bring to all of that. So I've put together a slide deck to go through some of these key words so that we can all have a conversation here and have a starting place to understand each other here for this interview today with the audience. So let's start with the big one here. If you want to take a few minutes to really describe in your view, in all of your work, and I realize there's a couple of books on this, but what is paleocontact? A lot of our audience members will think, oh, that's the ancient alien theory. explain for the audience members how you see paleo contact. How would you explain it?
Sure. Well, paleo simply means in the beginning, and contact means contact, or paleo can be used to mean very early. So that's all it really means, that there was contact with other species, other civilizations in the deep past, in the beginning. And I've come to that view because of my work in the texts, because as I've gone back to the root meanings of keywords in the Hebrew and the Greek of the Bible, I've realized it's describing encounters with beings that you and I would call extraterrestrials, and that many of the Bible stories which we have interpreted as God's stories are actually based on earlier stories from out of ancient Sumeria, Babylonia, Acadia, and Assyria that were not God's stories. Our God stories are based on stories about sky people, or again, what you and I would call extraterrestrials. And it is, you can use the phrase ancient aliens, although that seems to conjure up a lot of associations for people, but that's essentially what it is, that we live in a populated universe and that there has been contact in the present and in the deep past, and that our ancestors wrote about this and sewed the memory of it into ancestral narratives.
Right. And we'll get into the consolidation of a lot of these texts into the final versions of what we interpret the Bible to be today, and perhaps why that happened the way it happened a little bit further into the show. So first, one of the big hurdles, if you want to say that, again, we've had some issues since December having these conversations here. And to some extent, I understand we're all having this cognitive dissonance fatigue, I guess, over the last number of years with many events happening around the world, where we are being called upon to revisit what we think is our view of the world and our place in that world. And I think at some point like that, the rate of change is so rapid that people are starting to, okay, well, hold on, JC, please don't take away my God, right? So we've seen some of these comments here, and I want to bring up, for the sake of the conversation here too, a very distinct precision here before we go too far into the conversation. I think Mauro did a good job explaining it in this particular clip. This is an interview between him and Graham Hancock. You can find that on Graham's YouTube channel. I've selected a specific timestamp here. It's about a minute or a minute and a half. Let's play that as it pertains here to God, the single term of the word, versus God's, the plural, Elohim, that we are going to be discussing here in the interview today. So let's play this clip here and we'll get back to our combo.
Yeah, absolutely. Yahweh don't accept criticism. Absolutely. So he cannot be the God of love. Absolutely.
No.
He was a God of war. Only a God of war.
A God.
Not a God, of course. But
an entity,
to use this term,
an entity of war, a human being
entity of war
who uses war. Fascinating. If your interpretation of the Bible were to be widely accepted, it would completely destroy faith in the Bible. Is that not correct?
Yes, but what is important, and in the conferences, in the lectures, I always say that this, I don't say that God does not exist.
Right.
I don't know about God.
Yeah.
I don't speak about God.
Yeah.
I only say that in that book there is no spiritual God. There are the Elohim.
Yes.
And the Bible is the history of the relationship between Yahweh, one of the Elohim, and one people. Because Yahweh
He didn't much care about others.
No, the others did not exist, or if they don't want to submit, they must be exterminated.
Right.
Okay. Very well said, Mr. Bellino. First of all, just to be clear, do you, Paul Wallis, agree with that statement? And if so, why? Share the nuances with the audience.
Yes, I do agree with that statement. Very often, people respond to me who, from a faith background, I get a total spectrum of responses. And I do get one response from people, which is that they think I'm debunking the Bible or debunking God. And I'm not doing either of those things. Right. Graham Hancock there said if people understood the Bible the way Maro and I argue, it would destroy their faith in the Bible. I don't agree with that statement. Even Graham believes the Bible is full of information, but it's information that does not add up to perhaps a lot of mainstream orthodoxy.
Right.
I agree with what Maro is saying, that if you go to the Hebrew scriptures, there is no word for God in the way we understand God. I mean, if I use the word God, most people will assume I'm meaning a transcendent, spiritual being and the source of the cosmos. Those are the thoughts we have when I use the word God, capital G. There
And
is no
Moro in the clip. He says there's no word about the
there
spiritual
is no
God.
word for that.
Exactly.
There's no word for that. And you have to ask why. I agree with Maro that the texts were originally about something else. They were about other entities, plural entities. So Maro and our views are very, very close. Where we differ is that I come from a faith background. And so it was a big paradigm shift for me to begin doing business with the paleo-contact content of the Bible. And you talked about people saying to you, Jean-Claude, oh, please don't take my God away from me, because that's something I'm still able to stand on through all my shifting worldview. Well, I had that experience through my research path. And I did have to revisit the many assumptions I'd made about God because of the way I'd read the Bible. I would say it's actually helped me have a far more cosmic vision of God, and a vision of God that isn't rooted in separation anxiety, which is what really a lot of religion trades in. The idea you're separated from God, and therefore you need fixing, and this teaching will fix you, or these priests will show you how to do it, or these pastors will tell you when you're on good terms with God. All that kind of manipulative thinking, religious thinking, separation anxiety, I think does not exist when you arrive at a more cosmic vision of God. And one area where I do slightly differ from Maro is that I think when you get to some of the later writings in the Old Testament, the concept of a transcendent, creative, spiritual, loving God is there, even if they don't have a word for it. And one of the problems of understanding and interpreting the Hebrew scriptures or the Old Testament is that the word they often reach for when they want to describe that kind of God is the word Yahweh. The problem with that word is that is not what that word meant in the beginning, when the name Yahweh first appeared on the scene. It refers to what Maro is talking about, a being, one of a community of beings, one of a community of violent, colonizing, warfaring beings. And one of the things that motivates me to write in this area is that while we are confusing God with a warfaring being, it distorts not only our vision of God, but of the cosmos, of ourselves. If we think God is a xenophobe, we have to become xenophobes. If we think God thinks in terms of my people, not my people, we have to start thinking in the same kind of way. If we believe God is violent and brutal, we will start justifying that, and we will become that. And I think the history of religion more than demonstrates that.
Absolutely. We've seen all of these religious wars throughout our history, perhaps being manipulated and played out again here because of our understanding of who we are in relationships to God versus these plural gods, or the cast of characters here that Moro is talking about. Laura says, I've read the Eden series, brilliant work. I passed them to a minister who's questioning now the text, but she says it's essential for spiritual growth. Talk about that also right now. Why even though these conversations are difficult to have, why is it so important for us to really pay attention to this subject matter at this time? And also, if we want to bring in the astrology, we are moving into this age of Aquarius where we become the knowledge bearers, and we are being responsible here to perhaps cut out that middleman, which are these cast of characters here, and have a direct relationship with God, single term word. Share that with the audience.
Well, Laura, first of all, thank you for reading my books. And I love the use of your phrase spiritual growth, why this reframing is important to our spiritual growth. Because I think while we have a vision of God that portrays him as if he were some ultimate king who has to be pleased and who we have to tiptoe around for fear of offending him, and if we offend him, he'll act against us and consign us to, a fiery eternity. That is a brutalizing way to treat humanity. And I liken it to what happens to the intelligence and self-esteem of people who have to live in a home where there is a parent with substance abuse issues or maybe other mental health issues, which means you have to tiptoe around them for fear of them losing control and becoming violent. What happens is that your place shrinks to nothing. Your self-esteem shrinks to nothing. It all becomes pleasing the dysfunctional one. Right. That is what has been done to us as a civilization by this distorted image of God. We are nothing more than servants, pleasers of this unpleasable entity. And it's been very damaging to our ability to grow, thrive, make intelligent decisions. We're trapped in this permission-seeking mentality. It makes us very easy to manipulate, both by religious authorities and by civic authorities. And the only way we're going to break out of that and become spiritually more mature and more adult and more confident and able to enjoy our lives and explore is to dismantle that distorted image of God. And so that's why I think it's very important, an important aspect of my books, to separate our idea of God from these stories of colonization, brutalization, xenophobia, violence, serve me or I'll vape you. We have to separate all that away from our idea of God if we want to become mature, healthy, happy human beings, which I believe we do.
I'm totally with you on that. And there's one passage about these agreements so that one population would go and kill other populations' children as to not have their own children being killed and tortured and sacrificed. We'll get into that a little bit later here. But again, the distortion of our worldview, when you think about it in that context, suddenly we understand how so important these conversations are right now. Okay.
I want to quickly mention also,
sure,
because it relates to Laura's question. There is a wonderful description, I think, of God that the Apostle Paul gives in the New Testament.
Right.
And it comes in Acts 17, where he has to define what he means by the word theos, the Greek word for God, to a non-religious audience. And Paul says, by theos, I mean the source of the cosmos and everything in it, that in which we all live and move and have our being, of which we are all offspring. And I think that's a really high point. If I use the word God, that's what I mean. But there are times when I try and avoid the word God altogether, because for a lot of people, if I use the word God, then everything I was just talking about, that fear-based mentality clicks into place. I don't want to make a mistake. If I believe the wrong thing, the consequences could be appalling. We have to break out of that. And I just love that description because, as I say, there's no fear of separation in that explanation of God. So I always have to clarify what I mean by that word.
Very good. I appreciate you did. You've done so in so many of your interviews. I'm going to point to a very specific playlist that you guys have created, you and Mauro here, that I think is very fascinating and important for the audience who wish to learn more about all of these topics. I'm going to bring that up. But first, I think this is a good point maybe to break away from the YouTube audience. Tina, she says, as expected, fascinating conversation. I absolutely needed by the entire world. Yes, thank you. And Ben Thompson, one of our co-hosts here, also is in the chat. Hi, Ben. He's also from Australia. So hi, Ben. I hope you're enjoying the nice warm weather because we have really bad snowy weather here right now. Okay, guys, let me just bring the link here to the YouTube or to the Rumble feed where you can come and join us here for the No Holds Barred conversation. Okay, that is in the live chat now. And I'm going to disconnect now from the YouTube part of the show here. So hold on. And